Continental Connection Flight 3407, operated by Colgan Air, is en route from Newark, New Jersey to Buffalo, New York. It's been a busy flight for Captain Marvin Renslow. He's providing guidance to a new first officer, Rebecca Shaw, a former flight instructor from Seattle.
Bless you.
Shaw's only been with the airline for just over a year. She must decide if she now wants to become a captain.
I don't know what I want to do with the upgrade. It depends where I'm based.
Well, think of it this way. If you stayed on the queue, obviously you're not making the captain rate.
Right.
But you may have a better quality of life with regards to buying a house, having a schedule.
Shaw trained to be a first officer on the plane they're flying now. A Canadian-made Bombardier Q400. It's a twin-engine turboprop, popular with regional airlines. The 45 passengers have had a long night. Their plane was held up for 2 hours at Newark, a delay considerably longer than their journey. Flight 3407 is heading northwest over upstate New York. The trip is only 53 minutes. Visibility is poor, and there's a forecast of snow and moderate winds in Buffalo.
Just some water, please.
Elise Kausner is a student at Florida Coastal School of Law in Jacksonville. She's on her way to visit her family in Buffalo.
She had 5 nieces and nephews at the time, and they had a love luncheon at the kids' school, a couple of the nephews, and they both wanted Aunt Ellie to be their guest. Any excuse to come home, she came home. She talked to all of us from Newark.
Hey.
She called us from the lounge.
Yeah, it's been over 2 hours.
She was PO'd because of the delay.
Folks from the flight deck, your first officer speaking. It looks like at this time we're about 10, maybe 15 minutes outside of Buffalo. Weather in Buffalo is pretty foggy. Snowing a little bit there. I'd like to make sure everyone remains in their seats so the flight attendants can prepare the cabin for arrival. Thank you.
Colgan 3407, descend and
maintain 2,300.
Okay, down to 2,300. Colgan 3407.
Let's do a descent checklist, please. We can do the approach checklist along with it.
Sure. Bug set.
Set.
GPWS landing flaps selected 15 degrees.
The pilots go through a list of settings for the plane to continue its landing approach.
Sensor off. Yep.
Passengers can already glimpse the lights of Buffalo's suburbs. Clarence Center is on the approach path for aircraft landing at Buffalo's airport.
Gear down. Lokes alive.
Gears down.
All right, flaps 15.
Extending the flaps provides more lift, allowing the plane to slow to its final approach speed.
Jesus Christ!
Suddenly, the control column starts to shake. The Q400 is slipping out of control. Captain Renslow struggles to keep his plane flying. But it seems to have a mind of its own. The plane crashes into a house at 6038 Long Street. At air traffic control in Buffalo, Flight 3407 disappears from radar.
Check Colgan there, see if he's on you.
What's his call sign?
Colgan 3407.
Nope, I don't have him.
You see anything out there?
Nothing.
All right, call the fire department.
I'll never forget the dispatcher's words, plane crash, house on fire. I immediately got my shoes on and my coat on, got in my truck and started heading down the driveway.
Firefighters don't have far to go. 6038 Long Street, home of the Valinsky family, is less than a block from the Clarence Center station.
As I turned towards the village, the whole village was aglow. You could see the smoke, you could see the flame.
Karen Valinsky and her daughter make it out of their house alive, but her husband Douglas is killed.
My initial reaction was there was no way that somebody made it out. But the EMS division reported that they had 2 people and they were taking them to the hospital. And I said, well, which firefighters are they? And they said, they're not firefighters, Chief, they're survivors from the house. I actually physically had to go to the ambulance and look inside for myself to believe.
Firefighters have never seen a blaze like this.
If you've ever gone to a bonfire and stood 5 feet from it and you couldn't take it anymore, that's what it felt like from 100 feet away.
The height of it was just unbelievable, obviously because of the fuel that was probably added to it, and the debris area was very large. It was a very, very horrific sight.
We live in the town where the plane went down, right down the road. My son was driving home from a soccer game and went right by the plane crash and called me up and said, there's a plane down in Clarence. Never really entered our brain that it was Ellie's plane.
Flight 3407 has crashed 8 kilometers short of Buffalo Airport. All 49 passengers and crew are dead, including Captain Marvin Renslow and First Officer Rebecca Shaw. But many more people could easily have been killed.
You picture a house, and to see a plane on top of this house, no more house left, no more plane, only the tail section. You're asking yourself, how in God's creation did this happen? And not wipe the whole block out.
The next call was again from my son and said, in fact, it was Ellie's plane. And I said, Dad, there's no survivors. At which point my wife shrieked and just hit the ground. Chris said he had never heard his mother make a sound like that, and I hope he never does again. So that's when we knew that she was gone, and that was probably within 45 minutes of the accident.
The scene in the morning is one of utter devastation.
Clint Crookshanks from the NTSB, and I start poking around.
Clint Crookshanks is one of the first investigators on the case.
When we arrived on scene, there was a fire still burning. It turns out it was from a gas line that had been broken in the house. The firemen would put the fire out and it would reignite every couple of minutes. It was one of the grisliest, nastiest scenes that I think I've seen.
Flight 3407 may have been a small plane, but it's the worst crash in the US in more than 7 years. It will become one of the NTSB's most important investigations. The fire at the crash site of Flight 3407 continues to burn, preventing investigators from examining the wreckage.
That's where I think the box.
The airplane had crashed into a house, and then it had burned all night long, so all the debris was basically in the house.
Our concern is that we're losing evidence. It's perishable, and if we can't get in there and get the fire out, then we're not able to maybe get a hold of evidence that might help us during the investigation.
Clint Cruikshanks urgently needs to recover the black box flight recorders, which could contain valuable clues about the accident.
We knew that the recorders were in the tail part of the airplane.
Ordinarily, investigators don't go near a crash site that's still burning. But if the black boxes can't be rescued, they may never find out what brought down Flight 3407.
We started looking around and poking around into the wreckage and actually found out where they were.
Okay, whoa, it's probably in here, okay? The access panel's on the other side, so we're gonna have to cut a hole right there, okay?
The fire department produced a chop saw. We were able to cut a hole in the side of the fuselage and go in and grab the recorders and pull them out.
All right, that should do it.
To the immense relief of all, the recorders are undamaged.
Once we took the recorders out of the airplane, we put them on the jet and they were flown back to Washington, D.C. to our headquarters.
Now investigators are faced with a new hurdle. What little is left of the aircraft is hopelessly jumbled together with human remains and debris from the house.
It all burned and settled into the basement, so we had probably 10 feet of debris that we had to dig through in order to recover all of the airplane.
Authorities wonder how they can salvage any useful evidence from this chaos. They get invaluable assistance from an unusual source. A group of students learning to process crime scenes is enlisted to separate human remains from the rest of the debris.
They were graduate students from a local college, forensic anthropology students, and this was good experience for them to come dig through wreckage like this and look for human remains.
It's landing gear over there, please.
It's dirty, painstaking work, but it frees up investigators to concentrate on the aircraft ruins.
So we were on our hands and knees with brooms, with little shovels, scooping out debris, identifying it as to house debris or airplane debris, and then putting it in different piles. The first question for me as a structures engineer is to figure out if the whole airplane made it to the scene of the crash.
The wreckage is carefully studied to determine if the plane's four corners, nose, tail, and both wingtips are present.
If we find all four corners of the airplane, then we know that there was no in-flight breakup. There was nothing that departed the airplane during the flight that may have caused the accident.
One wing has been consumed by fire. The other is shattered into pieces.
Hey, have a look at this.
But investigators are gradually finding what they've been searching for.
Oh yeah, it's the last piece. It's the left one.
It wasn't until several days into the investigation, as we were scraping away some of the debris, that we actually found evidence of the left wing and the nose.
Investigators now have all the pieces they need to conclude that the entire plane is at the crash site. Whatever caused the disaster was not the result of a breakup in flight. The tragedy of Flight 3407 is under intense scrutiny at the NTSB offices in Washington. Officials there try to determine if some kind of malfunction caused the crash.
On this particular accident, we knew it was a landing accident, so we wanted to check the aircraft's performance, and then also we checked for flight control continuity.
Much of this responsibility falls to Scott Warren.
My role in the investigation was to be the systems group chairman for the safety board, so I was in charge of looking at all of the aircraft systems.
Warren analyzes the aircraft's cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, to determine if there were any indications of a problem in the cockpit.
Attendants can prepare the cabin for arrival. Thank you. Is that ice on the windshield?
He discovers that 6 minutes before the crash, the crew of Flight 3407 had noticed a buildup of ice on the aircraft.
Got it on my side. You don't have yours?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's lots of ice.
Ice can be a deadly threat to any airplane.
If an aircraft has ice on it, it will have more drag on it, so it'll require more power to maintain a given airspeed.
Oh yeah, it's the most I've seen on the leading edges in a long time.
Until a year ago, Rebecca Shaw had no experience with ice on an aircraft.
I'd never seen icing conditions. Never de-iced. Never experienced any of that.
When ice accretes on a wing, it adds weight to the airplane, but most importantly, it changes the shape of the wing. And of course, it's the shape, the curved shape of the wing that actually creates the lift. So by changing the lift characteristics of the airplane, it makes it less able to fly.
You know, I'd have freaked out. Like, I'd have seen this much ice and thought,
Oh my gosh, we were gonna crash.
Observing that there was ice on the airplane was an important thing to do. But then it would be important to turn around and verify that your anti-ice and de-ice equipment was on, and there was no indication on the voice recorder that they actually rechecked.
Flaps 15.
The CVR reveals that only minutes after the crew detected ice, a device called the stick shaker went off. It was a warning that the plane was about to stall, literally to fall out of the sky. Shortly afterwards, the aircraft did precisely that.
We know there were icing conditions. The only question was, were they bad enough to induce this airplane to have a failure?
Ice is now the chief suspect in the crash of Flight 3407.
If it's ice, let's prove it.
We were all convinced that we had an icing accident. We said, yeah, it's going to be an icing accident. We just got to make sure we look for these few key aspects of icing, verify that, and we're good.
But some of the victims' family members are less convinced.
Our initial thought was that it was an ice-related incident, that it was an icy night and brought the plane down. And as we began to talk to people who knew airline travel, who were pilots themselves, they would look kind of askance and say, I don't think so. That doesn't make sense.
Some investigators share that suspicion. Scott Warren knows a plane like the Q400 has a sophisticated de-icing system. It's designed to keep ice from building up on the wings and other critical parts of the aircraft. To prevent ice accumulating, the plane has rubber bladders along the front of the wings, called de-icing boots. A series of valves uses air from the engines to inflate the boots and crack the ice off the wing.
Those boots are designed to inflate periodically, and that inflation breaks off the ice that's accumulated on those leading edges.
Warren now wonders if the crew of Flight 3407 actually turned on their de-icing equipment. He studies data from the plane's other black box, its Flight Data Recorder, or FDR. It tracks the workings of crucial aircraft systems, including the de-icing mechanism.
We know from the FDR data that the de-icing system had been selected on by the crew, and it was on during the majority of the flight, and certainly at the end of the flight it was recorded in the on position.
But now Warren needs to figure out if the device was actually working.
Just because the data records that the system is on, that's a start, but you can't necessarily believe that one piece of information.
The only way to know is to find what remains of the plane's de-icing system and determine if it was active when the aircraft went down. Clint Cruikshank's team hunts for a crucial component of the system, the valves.
Excuse me. Okay, everyone, I just want to...
For the de-ice valves, we said, here's what it looks like. Look for something like this. If we can find those valves and we can test them and see if they're operating correctly.
The valves were very important to us because they are the key component that moves air from the engines where the bleed air originates for the de-icing system.
Okay, good. 5 more to go.
Five of the plane's 6 de-icing valves are eventually recovered.
Some were badly burned, some were in fairly good shape. And we took those valves and we conducted as much testing on those valves as we thought was appropriate for the level of damage. We looked at the level of electrical conductivity, and we looked at the pressure testing. We looked at a wide variety of things depending on the condition of the valve itself. And as far as we could tell, all those valves were working properly.
Is that ice on the windshield?
Got it on my side.
Now investigators have to consider the possibility
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's lots of ice.
that there was so much ice on the wings that the de-icing system couldn't get rid of it fast enough.
Oh, yeah. That's the most I've seen on the leading edges in a long time.
It has happened before. In Roselawn, Indiana, a French-built commuter plane crashed in 1994 after suffering a catastrophic buildup of ice on the wing. By analyzing how much power was needed for the plane to maintain its airspeed, investigators reach a surprising conclusion.
Basically, the aircraft was flying as if it had a relatively small amount of ice on it, but a very manageable amount of ice.
Looks normal.
It was not overloaded, it was not excessive.
If ice didn't bring down the plane, something else must have caused it to stall. Warren studies the Q400's operating manual to learn the plane's stall speed, the velocity at which it can no longer generate enough lift to stay in the air. He discovers that in the conditions Flight 3407 was flying through, it's roughly 111 knots. He now compares the plane's stall speed with its actual airspeed just before the stall warning went off. 131 knots, well above the danger zone.
Flaps 15.
When the stick shaker went off,
Jesus Christ!
they were not necessarily at the edge of a stall. They were still 20 knots or so away from the stall.
This new revelation deepens the mystery of Flight 3407. If it wasn't stalling, why did it fall out of the sky?